This is Joanna Lilley. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. Since its inception in 1949, Mental Health Awareness Month has been a cornerstone in addressing the challenges faced by millions of Americans living with mental health conditions. Although this month of recognition has been in existence for a while, stigmatization around mental health still exists. Throughout the month of May, we are bringing you episodes from the parent perspective to highlight this special month. Welcome to the Parent Series, brought to you by Success is Subjective.
It's time now for the Success is Subjective podcast. Here is your host and therapeutic consultant for young adults only, Joanna Lilley.
When COVID changed their lives in 2020, York was also dealing with a family trauma triggered by addiction in his family. We're going to hear about this during today's interview. By that time, York's professional life of the previous 20 years was focused around leading large hospitality teams in high-end settings, such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art and the Rainbow Room in New York City. York's favorite part of the work was to develop talent and connect both up and down the corporate ladder. These life events, COVID and the substance dependency, functioned as a catalyst for York to look at how he lived the last 20 years and, more importantly, how he wanted to live the next 20. York embarked on a path to build his own executive leadership coaching business. How we lead in the work setting, at home, and most of all, how we lead ourselves continues to fascinate him. In addition to working part-time as a peer parent leading meetings at OPLM, York developed his passion to volunteer as a parent coach in the addiction field, an area that, as we know, can be very lonely, and it's York's way to pay back with gratitude for the unexpected support he found along the path. Here's York. York, thanks again for being a guest on the Parent Series of the Success is Subjective podcast. I know we've had kind of an offline conversation, so I'm really excited because we're going to dive into a little bit of your son's experience, but from the parent perspective of what you experienced as a parent kind of in that journey and how that actually changed the trajectory in your life. So obviously doing a little dangling of a carrot for the audience to get excited about your story to come. If you're okay, let's give a little of the backstory of what was going on with your child prior to you as a parent exploring the need for treatment.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time. It's good to talk to you about this. It's a topic that's very dear to me and was not always easy to talk about, because as parents would, understand that it's painful when your kid is struggling. And so my wife and I have two boys. Our older one is our qualifier. He's the one who, when he was 15, 16, he struggled with ADHD, anxiety and depression. And then he started with school refusal, and we started with ADHD medication. But then he started to self-medicate, and we didn't realize it. And it was to these spurts where he would really delve into any kind of substance he could get his hands on. And it wasn't all the time, it was these extreme moments. And for us, it was a very confusing time. We didn't know how to help him. I got more and more pushy, because that's the only way I could kind of know how to act and try to parent. And after 2 psych hospital visits around his 17th birthday, we realized this is not a way we could want to continue. And he was a kid also who asked for help. And so we decided to send him to Wilderness Therapy, which was in Georgia. He was there for 12 or 14 weeks. And he did great, and we were more hopeful. And then we had an educational consultant, and we decided to send him to a therapeutic boarding school in Utah that was not focused on addiction, but more on anxiety and depression, because all of the therapists at that point had said, he's really not an addict. It's really not the main issue. What his issue is really anxiety and depression. And then substance dependency sort of on the sideline. And I don't blame him for saying that. Our son is a beautiful boy, but also complex. And so I think it was not easy to see. And so when he went to Utah, within 6 weeks, he sabotaged himself and relapsed by squirting hand sanitizer in a water bottle and getting himself totally drunk in front of the staff. And so this was in the spring of 2020, so it's height of COVID. we live in Westchester, north of New York City, and we had to like talk to people in a distance on a conference call. How do we help our kid? We couldn't fly there. And by far, it was the worst moment of our recovery. But it also brought a lot of new opportunities. And in hindsight, I didn't see it back then, but in hindsight, I saw that there was a lot of learnings that were helpful for us and for him. And so we found a different program, a therapist who's equipped to deal with substance dependency. And we made that the main focus. And from that point on, his recovery was really more of a step forward and very rarely a step back. And it was a big moment for us to learn and to really understand about the disease, but also how we can show better as a parent. And I'm glad to say he's still sober today, now almost 4 years. But what I'm more proud of is he is very engaged in recovery. He's in AA, mentors and helps kids and sponsors kids. And it's really built a beautiful community around him. I recently just went to Tucson to visit him, where he lives in Arizona. And he's got some great friends, and it really warmed my heart when I saw how much of a focus he has on building his connections. And because that's, at the end of the day, I think is one of the learnings we acquired, is to focus on connections. And so that's in a short summary what our journey, how it brought us to where we are today.
And I mean, that was so succinct. It was beautiful. So I want to ask the questions, because you really just ended on a perfect point where you're talking about, hey, now he's 4 years sober. He's living a great life. Like, he, it's kind of come full circle. And so you can kind of hear, without you even naming it, some of those like more positive emotional experiences that you're having as a parent, now seeing your child so far removed from the treatment experience. Is there anything that you can share in terms of some of those fears or emotions that you might have had early on in the treatment experience that might be helpful, again, now that you're reflecting back on it, for parents that are currently in it?
As any parent, you obviously are going to be afraid if something doesn't go well. And it's a very, for me, it was the most challenging experience I've ever had in my life. And also, just to reflect back, my work used to be in food service. I ran large teams, and I could fix big problems. But with our son, I was totally helpless. And the fear is real. You can't just squash it. And one thing that helped me was to learn about addiction. And to give you an example, it's like I couldn't understand why he kept promising he would stop taking substances. And then he got high again. And I got so mad, I got so upset, and it seemed so hopeless, and it's never going to get better. And that's a very natural reaction, because as a parent, you say, well, he said he would stop, and now he doesn't stop, and he keeps dropping into it. And what I realized, and then some of the therapists we had were fantastic, and they really helped me understand and to learn about, the brain. And I'm not a clinician, but just to butcher it for a sec, that, to understand that kids don't develop their frontal cortex until age mid-20s, and for boys even later maybe. And so for them to make rational decisions, maybe something they think, but they not necessarily won't act on it. And the amygdala is their fight and flight, and it's all their urges, and they're just driven by impulses. And so to understand that dynamic is actually a real conflict in them. And it's not something that you can think away with just be more disciplined, or just stop, or just punish them more, and then they will stop taking the substance. And inherently, if you don't acquire that knowledge, it is, as a parent, absolutely, it's very destructive. The fear and the angst of what may happen to your child just takes over your behavior. And then you start to change the way you parent. And so then over time, what gets lost is the relationship, and so the connection. So that was a big lesson for me. One of the key experiences I also had was learning about, one of the therapists said, so what's the opposite of addiction? And I said, well, it's sobriety. And she said, no, it's connection. She meant human connection. And so when I started to listen to podcasts, I stumbled over this one from Joanna Lilley, who wrote the book Chasing the Scream. And he has his TED Talk. And he speaks very passionately about what's wrong with the war on drugs and how we in society just put people to shame and ostracize them and push them aside and treat them like they're bad. And when in fact what they need is the connection. So this phrase, I'm not sure he coined it, but the phrase, the opposite of addiction is human connection, is really powerful. And so I saw that for our son, what really helped him is when he was able to build connection with his other peers and therapists and in his work. But then also, I think it's in a way, I look at it as a coin. And one side is your child, and the other side is the parent. And as a parent, you're so obsessed about it, you can't think about anything else. You just focus on your kid, and then it's almost like you're an addict. You can't think about anything else. And what suffers is the connection to yourself and the connection to your child. So that was another very important lesson for both me and my wife.
Yeah. I think that's actually phenomenal advice too for parents that are maybe frustrated. Like, why you keep making these promises, you keep saying that you're going to be able to stop. You know, if you don't have knowledge or understanding of addiction and brain development, that would be a phenomenal resource for a parent to understand. I mean, for a lack of better words, it just kind of like blows your mind, because everything that you realize that you've been doing, right? The behaviors, the assumptions, the conversations, all of it's moot. Because we're fighting against biology, understanding what's actually playing out. And so I think that's actually phenomenal advice. And for you to then dive in to better understand, educate yourself, and then through that process, understand like what we need is connection. What I need is connection, which I also think is actually a perfect segue for you to talk about the work that you're doing, because you kind of alluded to it. Hey, I used to work in a very different field and I could fix things easily, or I could, I could fix big problems. But you lost a little bit of yourself because of being so focused on your son. But that gave you insight then too, to kind of step back and make different decisions for yourself. So fill us in. I'm getting so excited.
So I used to run large operations in food service operations in high-end settings. And my last job was really cool. At the Met Museum, I was a VP of operations and in charge of all the restaurants. A great team. I loved the company I worked for. And that job ended because of a contract change. And then COVID happened. And then our son's first wilderness was in March of 2020. Essentially, it was a few days before New York City shut down. It was an odd timing coincidence. And I was able to take some time off and really focus on our son and, reconnect with my wife. And throughout the next months, I started to think about, I don't want to go back to working 60 hours, which was a slow week for me. And then continue to work on the weekend, answering emails, and never be there for my family. And one thing that I always loved to do, and I had, at one point I had 35 managers report to me, so that inherently always had to focus on, or not had to, I loved focusing on helping other people grow in their career. And there are many instances where hourly staff were promoted to managers, and I helped them, to get there, and the managers were promoted to become directors. And that was really my favorite part of my work. And so I looked into coaching because like I said, I loved that part of my work. And so I became a leadership coach. And I shopped around. Incidentally, a friend in our town had just finished a program. So she gave me a taste of it. So I tried it out. I said, this is great. I love this program. And so I got certified with the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching, and then also picked up a second modality. And so I coach individuals or groups, and essentially I focus on, there are a lot of tools, but two main tools are leadership and mental fitness. And leadership, I look at The very obvious first thought is we think about work. We think about what kind of leader are you? Are you a very dominant leader? Are you just hitting your fist on the table and everybody scours around and just does stuff because they're scared? Or do you inspire people? Are you able to really pull something out of someone and really have them understand the purpose of what we're working on and make them really put a little effort in? But then it's also leadership at home. How do you show up at home when things don't go your way? And especially for professionals who have very challenging jobs, big jobs, it can be quite challenging when you get home. Is it, what's going on here? At work, I get stuff done, and here, I can't accomplish anything, and my kids are not doing what I want them to do. So I was a terrible dad for a while. But then there's the third part of leadership, which I think is not talked about a lot, is how do we lead ourselves? And we all lead ourselves, knowing or not knowing. And so that became a really almost a calling, because I think if I can help people understand how they can lead themselves, not so much like the tyrant or the one that's punishing you because you don't do what you're supposed to do, but inspire you and also build wisdom in yourself and use your tools that are your inner core and your curiosity, your empathy, and how to find purpose in life, how to find connection, how to find love in what you do, and also the joy of loving other people. And those things are much more powerful in driving someone's actions as opposed to punishing yourself or yelling at yourself. And that's what, unfortunately, most of us do. There's statistics around how many thoughts we have a day, and you can go crazy about how many. There's such a breadth of, I had this one statistic, 7,000 to 75,000 thoughts, and I thought this can't be true. And then people wrote, well, what is a thought? And then I thought, yeah, this is a rabbit hole. But if you think about what's more interesting is most of our thoughts are negative. And what's also interesting is a lot of our thoughts are not new. They're reoccurring. We harp on things. We beat ourselves up about something. And we kind of regret, I didn't do this. And that's really sort of illustrates how we lead ourselves. And mental fitness is a term that I picked up over the time that is really it's an ability that you can train. And there are very specific characteristics and aspects and skills that you can develop in yourself to essentially face challenging situations and still maintain a positive outlook. Meaning shit happens in life, but there's a way to look at it that you find a silver lining much faster, you recover much faster, and you don't get dragged down so much by a disappointing experience. And if you do, you just have a very innate ability to find your strengths, your inner strength, and pull yourself up and move ahead. So, and that really came out of, if we hadn't had that experience, I probably would still be in food service. Experience with my son, I mean, which would have been fine. It was a great job and great people. But I'm so grateful for the experience I've had, and I'm so excited for both our boys, what they're going to do with their life. And it's exciting. Look forward to see. I don't know where they're going to go. It's still open.
Well, I feel like I'm just totally mesmerized listening to you talk about your journey and what it is that you're doing, how it is that you're intentionally helping people, or when you're kind of in that coaching role working with them, and then reflecting back too, this may not have ever happened had we not had this experience as a family. So of course I feel like I have to go down the rabbit hole of the one question that I ask most of my guests. Knowing you had such a drastic shift, honestly, in your career, I'm curious, this is kind of twofold. One, knowing the shift that you have and what it is that you're doing, I just want to ask you, do you see yourself as successful, right? Because here's, again, podcast called Success is Subjective. I have to know that. And then I'm also curious, the follow-up beyond that is, how has your vision of what is quote unquote success for your son, how has that changed through the transition for yourself in your new role, and also the journey you've been on as a family?
Yeah. So the answer is yes. I feel I'm successful, and it has changed. when success, even 5 years ago, would have looked like, how big of a job can I capture and maintain and grow in, and how much money can I make? That was some of the metrics that I would have measured success. But at the end of the day, there is what drives us and what really gives us purpose and meaning in life is really much more relevant. And that's different for everybody. So someone who really enjoys being in corporate and running large teams, and that's what they want to do, and they love working, doesn't matter how many hours, that's great. If that's their purpose, that what gives them meaning, that's wonderful. And for me, I was more focused on how can I do something I really love to do. And I loved my work, but I loved coaching much more. And it's also the side effect of enriching other people's lives, essentially, by removing the stresses that they experience, by helping them really accomplish what truly matters to them. That's a very rewarding activity. So success is really about what is it you truly want to do? And that question is not often asked. And it's very helpful, I think, to whichever way you want. And some people are very religious, some people love coaching, some people love therapy. So whatever the support conversation is, it's useful to have someone on the outside really help you identify what truly matters to you. And if you can find that and you can pursue that, I think then you're successful. And it's another way to look at it is, and this happened, actually I talked about this with some, in a meeting I had recently with some other dads. We were talking about how do I reflect back on my life. And I had this really morbid phase when our son was first in treatment in the first 6 months or so. And I thought to myself, here's how I lived my life for the last 20 years. And this experience is so scary. And in COVID is so scary. And I said, what the F am I going to do the last 30 minutes when I'm on my deathbed? What am I going to think about? Am I going to think about how good of a job I had and how big of a house I own? Or am I going to think about the relationships that are meaningful to me? And that was a very, at times painful, but then also very helpful realization and process. And so for me, that was really essential to walk through this door and reconnect with myself, because then I could also, I'm not sure you want to hear that, but I think it's important to talk about how to look at my kids' success, and it's really helping them pursue what truly matters to them and is important to them. And, as long as it's not illegal, unethical, or immoral. There's a friend of mine who says, you can do whatever you want, except as long as it's not illegal, unethical, or immoral. And it's really helping them be successful. It's their vision, it's their journey. And what I learned with this experience is that I limit my both boys in what they could do, because I had a very rigid vision, just very understandable and common, that, we have this idea and a certain path that you should take after high school or college, and then you graduate and get a job and whatever. But if that's not happening, does it mean that your kid's not successful? Because what if they can do something they truly want to do? And what if they study in 4 years when I'm mid-20s? Is it that bad? Because you start to limit what's possible by letting your fear dictate of how your kids should live their life. And to me, that's a very sad way of living. There's another aspect I think often. We as society, we evolve, and each generation brings up something new. So there's an inherent wisdom in the next generation's going to be smarter than the current one, which means that our kids are going to be smarter than we are. So if I don't allow that, and if I just tell them you can only do what I think is right, then you're basically asking society to stop evolving. And yes, you can give advice. You can say, well, I tried this didn't work. But if they want to do something that you think, well, I wouldn't do it that way, then you're really limiting of what they could accomplish. And I think that's a big learning also for me in removing the stressor from what do I need my kid to do so that I feel like an accomplished dad, or how can I best support them and they know I have their back, which I think is much more helpful long term.
I don't even have a follow-up question at this point. I just feel like we have to wrap up on that note, and it just feels like a perfect ending spot, hearing that what you've just shared about your own success and your son's success and how you've expanded your original view and whatnot. And so, York, thank you for taking the time to be not just a parent, like a parent perspective, right? Or sharing your parent perspective, but also just speaking your truth about your own transition to finding success as a mid-career change. Finding that purpose, finding the meaning, thinking, even though you ask those morbid questions like, hey, as I'm on my deathbed, what am I going to be thinking about? I think we need to think more existentially to be able to find or redirect what we're supposed to be doing and how to just live a better life for ourselves, especially after having the experience of the pandemic where it just kind of shook everybody. Thank you again so much for being a guest on the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to talk to you.
That's it for this week's Success is Subjective episode. We want to thank our guests for joining Joanna on the show this week and for being willing to share your journey. This podcast would not exist if it weren't for people such as yourself. Stay tuned for our next episode, where you can bet it'll be another amazing human sharing their personal story with the world. Make sure you check out the show notes, where you will find contact information, website details, and all social media for our guest. Put a face with a voice by accessing their interview on the newly formed successissubjective.org website. If you are interested in being a guest on the podcast, you can email Joanna at joanna@successissubjective.org. Be sure to check out the collegealternative.org and lilyconsulting.com websites for additional resources outside of podcasting. If you are listening to the show on Apple Podcasts, please subscribe to the show. And while you're at it, feel free to leave a review. You can also download to listen to the Success is Subjective podcast on other popular podcast apps such as Audible, Google Podcast, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn Radio. Last but not least, Success is Subjective is listener supported, made possible by our team and by you. You can support this podcast by joining the Patreon community at patreon.com/successissubjective. Thank you for tuning in, and remember, there is no single path through life. Success is what you make it.
Do you have a teenager or young adult who seems to have lost their way? Maybe they need help navigating adolescence, adulthood, and decisions surrounding higher education. Or maybe they have become withdrawn, their grades are slipping, or they are flat out living a reckless lifestyle, and you're concerned about their health and well-being. If this describes what your teen or young adult is facing, a therapeutic consultant may be able to help. Mental health, addiction recovery, and higher education can all be equally expensive. While information is everywhere, how do you know what option is the best one for your family? Some parents have the time to research and navigate this on their own. Some don't. If the latter applies to you, enter therapeutic consultants. Therapeutic consultants, like Joanna, listen to your family's specific needs and advocate on behalf of your loved one. TCs will research therapeutic resources, recommend treatment programs, and assist during adulthood transitions. Not being affiliated with any program, their support is completely objective and catered toward the best interest of each unique family. To find a qualified therapeutic consultant to work with, check out TCA, also known as the Therapeutic Consulting Association. Their website is therapeuticconsulting.org, all one word. Again, that's therapeuticconsulting.org. Then click the Find a Pro tab up at the top.